Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Professor Sasha Rose-Neal. I'm the Vice-Chancellor and President of the University of Sussex, and I would like to offer a very warm welcome to you all. Now, I can't actually see you, such is the lighting here. There, I can see that you're all there in the dark, and I'm in the light, but I know you're there. And I would like to welcome you to Sussex, all of you, members of the Sussex community, staff and students of the university, alumni of the university, everyone who's visiting Sussex for the first time. And I know we have school visitors from a whole range of schools around the region. Welcome to all of you. I'm not going to list the schools, but we've got more schools represented today than have ever been here before for this event. And I especially love welcoming people whose first time it is visiting, not just Sussex, but any university. I hope that you will be inspired to think that university is for you, and that you will consider Sussex later on in some time when you're considering universities to apply for. But welcome to all of you and to your teachers. We've got members here from the local community, from Brighton and Hove and wider Sussex, and friends and supporters of the university and of the Weidenfeld Institute for Jewish Studies, some of whom have travelled considerable distances to be here against Southern Rail as well, as always. And welcome to everyone who's watching this live streamed around the world. You too are very welcome. But especially welcome to our speakers, who I will introduce later. But we're really honoured to have all of you here in the Attenborough Centre for the Creative Arts. Thank you for joining us for our annual Holocaust Memorial Day event, which is when we as a community remember the millions of people who perished in the Holocaust, and when we think together about the meaning of the Holocaust and how we need to remember it today. Before we move on to the business of today, I just want to say something about today's event not being about discussing the very disturbing conflict that has been taking place in Palestine and Israel over the past 18 months or longer. Just as we're not here to talk explicitly about other sites of contemporary war, conflict and bloodshed. But I do want to acknowledge the profound pain and distress in relation to that conflict that has been experienced by many members of the Sussex community and probably many of you in our audience. Especially people from different backgrounds, but from Israeli backgrounds, Palestinian, Jewish, Arab, Muslim, and those with family and personal connections to Israel and Palestine. It's been a very, very difficult period. Now, I believe, as Vice-Chancellor, that it's not the university's role to take an institutional position or side in relation to complex contemporary global events and conflicts. But at Sussex, we do recognise that many in our community, both staff and students, and many of you visiting today, have strong feelings and views about the current conflict. So our position is that we ask all members of the university community and everyone visiting the campus to hold in mind always our shared humanity, whatever the differences of belief and experience there might be amongst us, and that we carefully consider the impact of our words and actions on each other. At Sussex, we're committed to providing an inclusive, respectful and supportive learning and working environment for every member of our diverse and international community. And at any one time, we have people from at least 120 countries living and working at Sussex. Within our community, we always try to ensure that diversity of belief and opinion can be expressed and heard safely and legally, and we seek to facilitate dialogue between those with differing views. We're committed to rigorous, rational evidence to argument and respectful discussion. We're a place for open debate. And we won't tolerate anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or any form of racism, harassment, or discrimination. And through all this, our commitment to academic freedom and freedom of speech within the law is foundational, and it's essential to our work as a university, our work of education and research. Now, today, the theme for National Holocaust Memorial Day this year, which actually was on the 27th of January, the theme this year is For a Better Future. And what an appropriate title this is for this contemporary moment, when the need for hope for a better future is felt very powerfully by all those who are concerned about the forces that underpinned the Holocaust. Processes of discrimination and dehumanisation, what you might call racialised othering, and the marginalisation of minority groups. Fear and hatred of those who are different, those who have their own cultures, beliefs and practices that differ from the majority. As centres of learning, universities can and should bring insights from history, from sociology, from political theory, law and psychology to seek understandings of how minority groups can be targeted and violently persecuted, attacked, murdered, eradicated. Our research and scholarship at Sussex is vital in this respect, and this event is organised by the Sussex Weidenfeld Institute of Jewish Studies. The Institute seeks to make the historical Jewish experience relevant to many of the major issues of today, such as the growing rise of religious intolerance, racism and nationalism. And we're very honoured that Peter Summerfield, who escaped from Germany just before the outbreak of the Second World War, has travelled to Sussex today to tell us about his experience. And he's coming back to Sussex. Peter has been to Sussex before. I'm sorry that George, his twin brother, isn't here today. George isn't very well. But Peter is here with his wife, Marianne, who I've had the pleasure of talking to. We're very pleased that Marianne's here too. And we welcome them both to the University of Sussex today. I would really like to thank Peter in advance of his talk for his work as the honorary lawyer to the advisory board of the Centre for German Jewish Studies, which was the previous name of the Weidenfeld Institute. Peter joined the advisory board soon after the Centre's inception in 1995 and has been an invaluable member of the group ever since, advising on legal issues and introducing donors who have helped support the Centre's projects. The second session this afternoon, so there'll be a break after Peter has spoken. The second session will involve showing a short film entitled Letter to a Pig, made and directed by Tal Cantor in 2022. Following the showing of the film, Judy Ironside, who I've also had the pleasure of meeting, who's the founder and president of the UK Jewish Film Festival and founder of the Pears Short Film Fund, she'll be in discussion with Professor Vicky Grace Richardson-Walden, who is Professor of Digital Memory, Culture and Heritage and Deputy Director of the Sussex Weidenfeld Institute for Jewish Studies. And they'll discuss with you, the audience, the film. The Association of Jewish Refugees, AJR, has supported our annual Holocaust Memorial Day event since 2001, when we first officially marked this event in the UK and at Sussex. And I'd like to extend our really sincere thanks to the AJR for this support, which enables us to put this event on every year. And I'm really delighted to welcome Michael Newman, who is the Chief Executive of the AJR, both to Sussex, back to Sussex today, but also to say a few words to you all. And I think, where is Michael? Michael's got to come up on the stage. Michael, you've got to come and say a few words. But before that, I will again say thank you all very much for coming. You're very welcome. I think we're in for a really interesting afternoon. Over to you, Michael.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Thank you very much for the invitation, Professor Rosenhill. I am here delighted to be with you today. Unfortunately, one of our trustees, Stephen Conn, was supposed to be giving this welcome, this introduction. Unfortunately, his mother-in-law passed away overnight, so he sends his regrets that he cannot be with us today, and so I'm standing in for him. So forgive me, because his speech was imminently better than the one I prepared for him. But as Sasha just mentioned, the AJR has been a consistent supporter over many years for this special event. And it's really one of the most outstanding Holocaust Memorial Day commemorations that takes place in the UK. And today is no exception. It's part of the AJR's mission to bring awareness of the Holocaust. And in doing so, we're proud to be the leading national benefactor organisation sponsoring and supporting projects commemorating the Holocaust and providing educational resources. As well as being chair of our education and grants committee, Stephen has very strong personal ties to this university. He was a graduate here from the School of European Studies and subsequently a member of the faculty at the school where he taught, amongst other subjects, European and public international law. And he was an undergraduate here And he particularly remembers Colonel Draper, who had been a military prosecutor at Nuremberg and was one of the first officers to enter Bergen-Belsen. And his tireless work seriously affected his health later in life. But Stephen recalls there was a picture in his office, Colonel Draper's office, where he held tutorials of him confronting Rudolf Hess. He interrogated him at Nuremberg and would tell the stories of this interrogation. And Stephen added that he had a particular memory of Colonel Draper's interrogation techniques were used with equally good effect for his students. And Stephen always had to become very well prepared. Now this year, of course, we also commemorate the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the extermination camp whose name has become synonymous with the Holocaust. So we reflect on the 80 years since the horrors of the Nazis' atrocities were fully revealed to the world. And it was at Auschwitz to where Jews and, of course, other people were from across Europe, from towns and cities where they'd lived for generations and for centuries, and with individual customs, traditions, and heritage, they were brought to their deaths. Religious and secular, Ashkenazi and Sephardi, merchants and students were all equally treated and mistreated and murdered at Auschwitz. This, of course, emanated from a country that had given us Schiller and Dürer, Mozart and cafe culture, Germany, the home of the Reformation and a cultural heartland. And as the historian Simon Sebag Montefiore recently wrote in relation to the 80th anniversary and the Holocaust, quotes, "This is why its denial, minimization, trivialization, or appropriate signs of moral disgrace and societal degradation." This past December, at the UK plenary of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IRA, the AJR was proud to launch the UK Testimony Portal, a collection of collections of testimonies from leading institutions, including the AJR's Refugee Voices recordings and those of the Spielberg Shoah Foundation. The portal is an interactive and easy-to-use archive for those who experienced Nazi oppression that brings together testimonies taken over many years from those who settled in or have a connection to Britain. The portal also includes Kindertransport tapes captured here as part of the university's special collections at the Keep. It includes the testimony of the pioneering journalist Hella Pick, CBE, who sadly passed away last year, and who was much loved and admired everywhere, but especially here at Sussex, where she spoke some years ago, and at similar HMD events and AJR gatherings. Through the portal, we are not only showcasing the testimonies of people who experienced Nazi oppression and who subsequently lived in the UK, but also honouring their memory and those of their loved ones who perished. In December, and again last month at the AJR's own Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration, we were also proud to present 80 Objects, 80 Lives, a digital exhibition that features 80 objects from filmed testimonies of British Holocaust survivors and refugees, and one of the 80 objects, where the film was recorded with our speaker, Peter Summerfield. Each of the objects is a carrier of memory, and they connect the interviewees to lost communities, lost family members, and lost possessions, and to specific moments in their own life journeys. A little like the Netsuke in Edmond de Val's Hair with Amber Eyes, or Proust Madeleine in À la Recherche du Temps Perdu. It is a project conceived by Lord Pickles, the Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues, assembled by the AJR and presented as part of the UK IRA presidency. So for those of you on social media, and I look more towards the back of the room to younger people, please do share these precious stories. At this critical point in time, when we move from living to lived history, the AJR continues to dedicate our work to represent and support Holocaust refugees and survivors and their families. We are fortunate to receive generous funding from the German government to help us deliver our unique and vital social welfare assistance across the country. So if you know of anyone who could benefit from our work and our services, please do let us know. We're also committed to engaging with the next generations to whom the legacy and responsibility of remembrance is passing, just as it is also passing to you, the students here, to carry forward these critical and compelling eyewitness accounts. We welcome any students as well as faculty here to join our Next Generations group, which has an active social programme as well as taking the work of the AJR forward. So today we reflect on what was lost, but we also remember the contributions of those who found refuge and built new lives in this country, and to the next generations to carry on this important work. And we pray for a better future for all. This is one of the tests of our time. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Gideon Rouveni, and I'm the director of the Weidenfeld Institute of Jewish Studies. I would like to begin by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to Diana Franklin for organizing this year's Holocaust Memorial Day event on behalf of the Weidenfeld Institute. Special thanks also to Stevie Starr and her colleagues in the Alumni and Development Office for their invaluable assistance in bringing this event to fruition. And as in previous years, we extend our profound appreciation to the Association of Jewish Refugees for their long-standing support of our initiatives, including the generous grant that made this event today possible. We live in a time where holding a Holocaust Memorial Day is no longer a giving. I would therefore like to thank our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sasha Rosennail, for her and the university's unwavering support of our work during these challenging times. We find ourselves in an era where the lines between fact, fiction, and outright fabrications are increasingly blurred. Just a few weeks ago, in a live talk with ex-owner Elon Musk, Alternative for Germany, the AfD, Chancellor candidate Alice Weidel claimed that Adolf Hitler was not right-wing, but a communist instead. This claim, of course, is utter nonsense. A few days later, the same Mr. Musk said in another public event that Germany has too much of a focus on past guilt. What is most alarming about these statements is not simply the historical revisionism, an attempt to rewrite history of National Socialism in a way that trivialized the Holocaust. Unfortunately, such distortions are not new. What is truly shocking is that these words came from figures with enormous influence. The leader of a party projected to become the second largest force in German parliament after the upcoming election at the end of February, and one of the most powerful men in the United States today. I don't know about you, but these developments send shivers down my spine. How do we respond? What practical steps can historians, educators, and the broader public take to counter this kind of revisionism, which threatens to erode the empirical foundations necessary for responsible use of power? Holocaust Memorial Day offers us a moment to reflect on precisely such questions. It is an occasion for us to place testimony within its historical context and explore difficult topics with sensitivity and nuance. Every year, we invite a survivor to share their story. Survivor testimonies provide a unique window into the thoughts, feelings, and expectations of individuals who experience history firsthand. These testimonies remind us of the human impact of historical events and the moral responsibility we bear to ensure such atrocities are never repeated. Today, we are deeply honored to welcome Peter Summerfield as our guest speaker. Unfortunately, his brother George was unable to attend the session this afternoon. Their story will take us back to a period of escalating persecution of Jews and other minority groups, a time when the world remained silent as Germany began implementing its racial policies. As we listen to their stories, let us reflect on the importance of preserving memory, confronting distortion, and standing firm against the forces of denial and revisionism. It is through such acts of remembrance and education that we honor the past and safeguard our future. I would like now to invite Peter to join us in the stage and present his testimony. So please join me in welcoming Peter to the stage.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be given the opportunity of telling you the story of my life today. You know, when people think in terms of the Holocaust, they often think only in terms of Auschwitz. But the Holocaust did not begin with Auschwitz, it ended with Auschwitz. And I'm very lucky to be alive, because if I hadn't escaped with my family just 4 days before the war started in 1939, I would not be here talking to you today. When I think of Auschwitz, I think of my uncle who died there, and I think of other members of my family who unfortunately died in the Holocaust. But I'm lucky because I'm here, living in a democratic country, lucky to be alive, and very pleased as well to be associated with your lovely university here. Now, you can see that my brother and I are the twins. My brother unfortunately had a chest infection, that's why he's not here today. But he would to some extent be duplicating what I'm going to be telling you, because we've always done things together. I'm very sorry he isn't here, but I shall try and replace his part of the story, because it happens to be the same as mine. We've always done things together. Now let me first of all show you my parents. They were living happily in Germany in the 1930s. There's always been anti-Semitism. That's unfortunately a truism. But generally, Jews in Germany in the 1930s were living reasonably comfortably. They were in all walks of life. There were the rich, there were the poor, there were the academics, and a great number of them were also professionals. My parents, they were very simple Germans enjoying life. My father was working in a bank. My mother was a dressmaker, which later on was very valuable, because for dressmaking, you didn't need languages. Here you've got some pictures of my family. You can see my mother and father. The gentleman with the spectacles, that was my uncle who died in Auschwitz. The lady on top is my grandmother who was killed in Theresienstadt. She was murdered there. You see again how very much my brother and I were similar. We were living quite happily in Germany, but Hitler wasn't prepared to agree that. He had to find a scapegoat. He was very unhappy because Germany had lost the First World War. And of course, Germany was suffering. The Treaty of Versailles was pretty much influencing life in Germany. They were very much in starvation mode. So he took the opportunity when things were not going well to press forward his egomaniac ideas of racism. Because he felt that there were people in this world who were upper class and who were worthy, and there were people who were unworthy. He was a pure racist. But my parents weren't interested in that. Neither were the Jews of Germany. They just wanted to live life as always. But then, gradually, as I'm going to tell you, things got worse and worse, and racism took over what could have been a very cultured society, because after all, Germany has got some of our greatest writers and thinkers, and no one ever expected that the Germans would turn into a Hitler state. This first photograph shows you my father taking us for walks in the park. He was a very proud father. In the background, you can hardly see it, but there's already a swastika. And also you can see the two of us carrying a bag. Those are the bags which children in Berlin were given then, and are given even now when they first start school. But my brother and I, to begin with, didn't realize what was happening. But things in 1933, when we were born, in June of 1933, had already started this tremendous urge of Hitler to go against the Jews and start the anti-Semitic pogroms, which then followed. In 1933, at that time, he already had a great deal of propaganda. Goebbels was already starting. And what he did, he started to dehumanize Jewish people, produced films which showed Jewish people leaving a synagogue, and then they showed rats leaving a sewer. Already in 1933, when my brother and I were born, only 4 months after Hitler came to power, Germans were being advised not to go and shop in Jewish shops, but only in German shops, thus making a distinction between Jews and Germans, was gradually making this difference between ordinary Germans, as he called them, and non-ordinary Germans, as the Jews were being labeled. Here is a photograph of the little family, my mother and father, and you can see we're carrying teddy bears. That teddy bear comes in again later in my story. We were living in a 3-bedroomed flat, and we were quite happy there. But we weren't allowed to continue to be happy. But my parents never thought at that time that the time would come when they would have to flee for their lives. When we went for walks, gradually we noticed one or two things were already being different. First of all, we noticed that one park which we used to go to, we were suddenly not going to that park. We asked parents why, and they said, well, we're not allowed in there, because already signs were going up in various parts of Berlin. The Jews were not allowed to enter, Jews were not welcome. We didn't understand that, but we suddenly realized that there was one park we were no longer going into. But there was a park where we did go in, and there we were told, oh, but you mustn't sit on a green bench. You can only sit on a yellow bench. That's one way in which we learned our colors. But what we remember most in those very early days was that our best friends were the sons of the caretaker. The caretaker was always a very friendly person, and we used to play in the yard. We played football, hide and seek, all sorts of games. And one day, they came back from school, and they said, we're sorry, we're no longer allowed to play with you. Something about you being Jewish. We didn't know what they were talking about. They didn't know what we were talking about either. But from that moment onwards, we weren't able to play with these lovely two boys anymore. We were probably at that time about 3 or 4 years old. The father of those two boys, the caretaker, who later on was very helpful to us, as you will see. He went over to my father and he said, I wish I could change things. I enjoyed seeing the boys playing together. But he said that if he disobeyed the order, he himself would be thrown into concentration camp. Gradually, the Germans were being told, don't associate with Jewish people. And of course, in 1935, when the Nuremberg laws came out, there was a definite distinction made as to who was German and who was Jewish. Jewish people were defined. If you had one grandparent who was Jewish, then you were Jewish, even though yourself might not be interested in religion, had no knowledge that you were actually Jewish. But you were already being singled out as being Jewish, whether you liked it or not. The passport which my mother had, it's not a passport, it's actually an identity card, has a big J on it. So you could tell immediately that my mother was Jewish. And very interesting when you look at it very carefully, it says that my mother's name is Margaret Sarah Frieda. Now where does the Sarah come from? Frieda was her name, but Sarah. At that time, every Jewish woman had to have the name Sarah, and every man was given the name Israel, so that every document immediately indicated that you were Jewish. So if it didn't have a J on it, the Germans would immediately recognize you as being Jewish. You see, it's got my mother's fingerprints. So when we went out for walks, there was always a possibility of my mother being stopped or my father being stopped, being asked to produce their identity card. Also, Germans' children were running around with their swastika flags. But of course, we didn't have flags. My parents didn't buy us these flags. We wanted them. I remember asking for them. But my parents, the last thing they wanted us to do was to have Nazi swastika flags. So things already began to be difficult, and we realized it. But then, to make matters worse, one edict after the other was promulgated by the Nazis. They gradually stifled Jewish people. We were not allowed to go to the cinema anymore, not allowed to go to the theater, we're not allowed to attend sporting activities. Everything gradually became more and more difficult. Over 100 edicts over a short period of time. We weren't allowed to go to theater, cinema. There's very little now that Jewish people were allowed to do openly. So their only friends at that time were other Jewish people, because their non-Jewish friends were keeping away from them. Some Germans objected. They didn't even like this idea of having no right to go to Jewish shops. And some of the main shops in Berlin happened to be Jewish, but they were prevented from going there. And if they did enter, their names were taken, and they were in danger of being caught up in some fanciful way and sent to concentration camps. Because in 1933, the concentration camp started. Dachau, near Munich, was already opened in 1933. But the people who were being sent to concentration camps at first, they were mainly political people, political opponents of Hitler. But he wasn't only against the Jews, he was also against the Slavs, he was also against any black people, anyone who had their ideas which were different from his ideas. It was pure racism. And anyone at that time who argued against Hitler or tried to oppose Hitler's ideas was immediately sent into concentration camp. Now, you can well imagine that at that time, the one thing people talked about, and we noticed even my parents and sometimes in conversation which we didn't understand, they were talking about how can we escape, how can we get away from Germany. So by 1935, 1936, we were already talking about that. My parents kept all this away from us as far as they could. But we realized that things were beginning to be different because we weren't going out very much. We seemed to be at home most of the time, and people who used to visit us no longer visited us. And of course, we were no longer allowed to play with those two boys we always used to play with in the yard. And then came the time when we had to go to kindergarten. There was only one kindergarten open in the whole of Berlin, and that was right the other side of Berlin. So my mother used to take us there in the morning. She waited for us for a few hours, and she said later on when we discussed it, that she had nowhere to go to. There was not even a restaurant she could go and have a cup of coffee. It was all forbidden for Jewish people. So she had to wait until we came out. Then one day, when we were going to the kindergarten, this was the day after Kristallnacht. What happened there, as you will all have learned in your history, what happened there was this, that in 1938, Kristallnacht happened when in one day, thousands of Jewish people were suddenly, mainly men, sent to concentration camp. Homes were looted, businesses were either confiscated or trashed. It was one of the worst pogroms the world has ever seen. That possibly could have been avoided because shortly beforehand there was in fact a conference which took place in Evian, which the Americans called, and the conference was to see whether countries would not be prepared to take Jewish refugees who were trying to escape Germany at that time. That conference, which was attended by over 30 different delegations, achieved absolutely nothing. The delegates were much more interested in the golf course, which was next door to the premises where the conference was being held. There was only one country which was in any way interested in helping Jews. Not one country agreed to take more Jews than their quota, which they had already fixed. not even the Americans increased their quota. In fact, to some extent, they decreased it rather than increased it. By this time, my parents were desperate, as you can imagine. So they started to think, where can we go to? Which country could possibly take us? There were only two ways in which one could get out of Germany at the time. One way was to find a country where you could find employment, some sort of work. The other way was to try and find a sponsor, someone who would be prepared financially to be responsible for you. So my parents, first of all, tried Australia. Australia at the time needed people to go there. It was underpopulated. But there was no one in Australia, when we tried, who was prepared to help us by giving my parents employment or by taking us on. In fact, they said they had no problems in Australia and they didn't want to introduce problems by taking refugees. No country was really very helpful at the time. But we remembered there was a distant uncle in Pennsylvania in the United States. And my parents wrote to him. They wrote to him and said, please, can you help us? We're desperate, we need to get out of Germany. Can you possibly sponsor us? Those letters begging him to help us are all now at the Jewish Museum in Berlin, because they're very interesting. They show in some detail the difficulties which Jews were under, where life had become intolerable, this gradual strangulation. Life was no longer normal. It was absolutely non-existent. It wasn't life at all. It was existence and not life. At first, that distant relative said, I'm very sorry, I'm already helping 2 other families to come to America. He wasn't very rich, and he said no. But my parents continued to write, and in the end, he relented. Yes, he said, I will take you. And fortunately, he did. In the end, it was already now 1938. In 1938, he wrote, we got a letter from the American authorities, which you can see on screen at the moment. The good news and the bad news. Yes, the United States would be prepared to take you as refugees. But you were number 42,686 to 69 on the waiting list. We had no idea how many were going to America every month. But here we were, with the good news and the bad news. How long would it take before we could possibly get out? In the meantime, because the conference at Evian had failed, Hitler released all his forces, and we had Kristallnacht. As you know, because I've seen already outside here today, Germany expelled all those of Polish nationality away from Germany in 1938. And they went there under terrible conditions. They had to flee with everything. They weren't allowed to take their clothing with them. They hadn't been able to take their goods with them. And it was that which caused the terrible consequences where the relative of one of the Jewish people who was in Poland in terrible conditions, that relatives, as you know, shot someone in Paris, and that gave the Germans the okay to unleash the terrible night of the pogroms, Kristallnacht. Now, my father could have been interned as thousands of other Jewish men, but fortunately, because of his association with the caretaker hid him in the cellar for a few days. I remember this well, because usually my father would come and say goodnight to us, but for a few days he didn't. When I asked about that later on, when we were in England, I was told the reason was quite simple, because your father was being hidden by the caretaker. But my father-in-law, the father of my wife Marianne, he was less lucky. He was lying in bed when he was seized, schlepped off to the nearest station and taken to Buchenwald. No warning, nothing. Thousands and thousands of Jewish men for Kristallnacht were taken there. It was so crowded that he didn't even find a place inside a hut. It was November 1938. It was cold. It's colder in Germany even than in England in that time. He had to sleep outside, and he was terribly treated. He's never forgot it, and he never quite got over it. Fortunately, the mother of Marianne, my wife, was very, very brave. She knew that the family had had permission to come to England because they had found a job there. There was a family association. So my ex-mother-in-law took the life into her own hands and went to the Gestapo headquarters to try and find a letter which had gone astray, which would have given them permission to leave Germany. When she left, apparently, she said, I realized I might not come back. She was lucky because she was blonde, blue-eyed, just the type that the Germans liked. She got away with it. And she waited all day until someone was prepared to help her to find that letter. And without that letter, my parents, my ex-parents, and my wife would not have been able to get out of Germany. But fortunately, that letter enabled them to get out in 1939 at the last moment. First, my ex-father-in-law came, and later on, my ex-mother-in-law and Marianne. But here we were, also desperately wanting to get out and waiting every day for that letter to arrive, for the green light. Now, you can see that letter on screen was dated December 1938. It wasn't until late June, beginning of July of 1939 that we finally got the green light. You will all know that war started on the 1st of September 1939. So there was just a window of opportunity to get away. So once we heard, the end of July, we bought a huge, big container into which all our belongings would be placed. And these belongings would then be sent first to Hamburg, and then by boat from Hamburg to New York, and then on to Pennsylvania, where we hoped that we would find refuge. I remember this very well, because in order to prepare for that, my father had to prepare a list of everything that went into the container, whether it was a toothbrush, whether it was a bed or a big cupboard of some kind. Everything went into the container and had to be listed. It took my father days. I remember him typing away on a typewriter. I was about 5 years old, so I remember it well. But you will see, not only is there a list, but every item had a number on it, because we had to pay again whatever we'd paid for it the first time. This was pure theft. Everything which we had already bought maybe months, years beforehand, we had to pay again. And my father was very careful to be absolutely honest about the value, because he realized that he made a mistake that could have led us into concentration camp. Also, we were not allowed to take anything which was of value. We'd already had to give up most of our money. By that time, most businesses had either been confiscated or taken over from Jewish people, either for no value whatsoever or for very little value. So my father was very careful to make sure that the list was correct. And there was a Gestapo officer who made sure that everything that went in, we were allowed to take with us, and also that we had paid for it again. And at night, because it took 4 days, the door was shut in the room where the packing was going on, and it had a seal on it. And I remember my mother saying, for goodness sake, don't go near that door, don't go near the seal. If we'd broken the seal, that would have been a great opportunity to send us all to concentration camp. Fortunately, my brother and I were reasonably good. My parents often said we were very good, because even when we went to synagogue, when we saw the synagogue burning after Kristallnacht, the synagogue we'd been into, when we went there for worshiping, she always told the story of how good we were. Because when we were told that we should not talk while the rabbi was talking, one of us very cheekily said, why should we talk? The man up there, he's talking, why shouldn't we talk? But fortunately at that point, we were obedient children. We didn't go near. So everything went into the container. And the container went to Hamburg. As soon as it got to Hamburg, everything in the container was auctioned off. It was opened up. It was auctioned. We never saw any of those goods again, ever. So now we had to decide to take our luggage. We decided on 3 cases, and my father had an attaché case, and he put all his papers in there, which he needed for the journey to America. Interestingly enough, we were going to go by boat on a Wednesday. And my father bought tickets to go by boat from Hamburg, first to New York, and then we would have gone on by train to Pennsylvania. We were going to leave on a Wednesday. The Saturday before that Wednesday, my mother's foster mother came and said, I think war's going to start at any moment. Don't wait till Wednesday. I think you should leave today, Saturday. The first thing is my parents were very displeased because she came very early in the morning. We hadn't even made the beds. They complained, I remember that. We hadn't had breakfast. My brother and I were hungry. She said, forget about hunger. Think of what's important. My father wasn't easily persuaded, but we're leaving. We're leaving on Wednesday, today's Saturday. Fortunately, my mother had the good sense to say, you know, perhaps there's something in this. Perhaps we should change our plans. forget about the shipping tickets to go from Hamburg. See whether we can't still leave today, Saturday. But we'd given up all our money. We had no money to buy those tickets to go by train. My father fortunately remembered the caretaker. He went back to that caretaker and said, "Could you lend us the money? We need the money to be able to buy tickets to leave as quickly as possible." And he lent us the money. There were good Germans, not all Germans were bad. He lent us the money. After the war, of course, we repaid him, and we were helpful to him after the war. But at that point, it made all the difference. The BBC made a film of it, Saved by a Stranger. That stranger was the caretaker, the father of those two children we were no longer allowed to play with. He lent us the money. So on Saturday night, here we were in Berlin Zoo station, just with our 3 bags of luggage and my father's attaché case. By that time, my brother and I were 6 years old, so we remember this well. There was one person to see us off. She was about 24, and she had only just got married a few weeks beforehand. The husband had found a job as a gardener in England. He was preparing the way. So he was in England, and she was going to be a nursery nurse. And she had permission also to come to England to join her husband. So we said to her, "Look, we're not going to wait till Wednesday. Why don't you come with us? Today's Saturday." "Can't come with you." "Why?" "I've got to pick up 2 dresses from the dressmaker. But look, I'll see you in London because tomorrow I'm leaving at lunchtime. Tomorrow, Sunday. I'll pick up the 2 dresses in the morning. I'll see you in London." We couldn't persuade her to come with us. Yes, she left the next day with those 2 dresses. The border was closed. She never made it. She lost her life for those 2 silly dresses. The husband used to see us during the war and cry on our shoulder. Why hadn't she listened? She could have saved her life. But it was not to be. But here we were on the station. Remember the train coming in, pushing ourselves onto the train. And you think, at last, the story can only get better. But not quite. Yes, we were on the train. All night. It was very uncomfortable. Fortunately, my mother had 2 knees, 1 knee for each of us. We reached bedtime, which is the border town between Germany and Holland, the next morning. As we entered the station, there was the announcement made in the usual brusque way in which Germans tend to announce things. "Alle raus!" Everyone out. Bring with you your papers. What they were saying was you have to prove that you've given everything over to the Nazis and that you had permission to leave and that there was a country which would take you. They then said, "Leave your luggage on the train. It'll be inspected on the train." So my father got out, my mother got out, and of course we went with them. My father was just carrying his attaché case. As soon as we got out of that train, which was a transcontinental express, which was supposed to wait and take us through Holland to Hook of Holland, reversed back into Germany, was shunted back into Germany with all our luggage. I remember my parents being very distressed. But what could we do? Everything was lost on that train. Everyone who was on that train lost their luggage. Fortunately, of course, we had our documents, and these were proved to be correct. But now we had to wait. We waited for 24 hours at bedtime, sitting on the bare floor. My brother and I didn't realize how precarious it was for my parents. Were we going to go to freedom, or were we ourselves going to be shunted back into Germany? They couldn't just leave us there to rot. Something had to happen. We didn't understand. What my brother and I understood is that we were hungry. We were thirsty, but nothing was offered to us for 24 hours. And even if we had to go to the toilet, a Nazi guard would come with us to make sure we wouldn't try and escape. Fortunately, it was a Dutch train which arrived. We didn't understand how my parents felt, but I'm sure you can understand how they must have felt a sense of freedom, a sense of relief when it was a Dutch train. And we had to change trains 4 times in Holland to get to Hoek of Holland. And each time we changed, there tend to be some Dutch people on the platform who somehow knew that we might be hungry. All I know is that we were offered some chocolates and some sweets. But how happy my parents must have felt that we were leaving the sheer hell of Germany, but going into the unknown. We got to Hoek of Holland, from Hoek to Harwich, and we arrived at Liverpool Street Station, the 4 of us. And we got off just the clothes we were standing in. Nothing else, except one thing which we had. Yes. The one thing Jones couldn't take away from me this was my teddy bear. I named him Teddy. But we'd reached freedom. What is the use of having money or assets that doesn't help? We were free. But here we were, arrived in London, no language, no one expecting us, not knowing what to do. Fortunately, there was a Jewish charity, now World Jewish Relief, which is a great charity helping not just Jewish causes, but all causes. World Jewish Relief heard that there were still refugees arriving in the same way as we were arriving. So they sent a representative, and they took us to a hotel, and for 2 weeks, they paid for us to live in this hotel. We had no money, but they gave us money so that for the next 3 or 4 years, they supported us. We used to live in just one room, but we were free, and we were happy. And we started to learn English as well. The first room we had, there was a school opposite, and the headmaster heard that there were 2 refugees there. And he sent over a representative and said, I'll take the 2 boys without charge. It was a private school. He took us without charge. So immediately we did find There was kindness here in England, a kindness which we'd never experienced in Germany those last years. It wasn't easy for my parents because, to show you, first of all, these are the keys which my father used to close up boxes when he was doing the container. Rather than having difficulty unpacking, he had boxes, and these were closed by these keys. But the keys were now useless. We had the keys. The Berlin Museum showed them as the useless keys. What very much helped us was that we had one passport between the four of us. And this is a picture of the passport, as you can see with the big J on. Here you can see the inside of that with my parents, and circled in red, my brother and myself. I've never since seen a passport for four people. Usually every person has to have his own. Fortunately, we had one passport between the four of us. Otherwise, my father might have gone ahead, like the young man whose wife was not able to join him. They had separate passports, that's why he had gone ahead. My father might have gone ahead to England to prepare the way. But he couldn't do that because we only had one passport between the four of us. On that passport you can see the date we arrived. The date is the 27th of August 1939. War started on the 1st of September. And what it says there as well is that my parents weren't allowed to work or engage in any employment, which was understandable because England was going to be a stepping stone to America. But of course that made it very difficult because within 4 days of our arriving, the war started. The first thing we got was a present from the government. They gave us gas masks. My brother had a Mickey Mouse one, and I had a Donald Duck one. That was one way you could tell the difference between us. But at least we were free. We lived throughout the war in England, in London. We were not evacuated because they thought we would be going to America. The bombing started almost immediately, and my mother thought that the best thing would be for us to sleep in the underground. So for 8 months we used to sleep in the underground at Tottenham Court Road, platform 3 or 4. My father was interned. The British could not distinguish those Germans who were friendly, like all Jewish people would be friendly to Germany, and those who were unfriendly, who might be spies. So Churchill gave the order, intern all Germans. Don't make a distinction, just intern them all. So my father was sent to the Isle of Man on internment. My father-in-law also. My father stayed there for 8 months. He was only released when we were supposed to go to America. The ship was designated to be the one we would leave on, so he was allowed to leave. My father-in-law was interned for a full year. The ship which we were supposed to go on was cancelled at the last moment. We should have gone on one a week later, but someone took pity on my mother and put us on the ship 1 week earlier than the one which we were supposed to go on. And that ship, which we were now put on and placed on, was cancelled because it was too dangerous even for civilian ships to cross the Atlantic. although America was not yet in the war. They didn't join the war until much later. But so we stayed in England, and we became naturalized. We became naturalized in 1948. We found schooling rather difficult to begin with. It wasn't the language which was difficult, but because somehow schools were always being bombed. Every time we went to a school in a certain area, in Camden Town, for example, it was always bombed. Or else, in the one room we were living in, was in a house where there was a bomb or an exploded bomb. So it wasn't an easy time. But on the whole, both my brother and I remember a reasonably happy time. We were busy collecting shrapnel in the streets. Fortunately, we went to quite a good school, because the one school we went to, first of all, we were being bullied because our English wasn't very good, and understandably, the boys there thought maybe we were Germans. So we did get bullied. So my mother took her life in her hands, in a way, and went to a headmaster and asked the private school whether they would take us. And because most of the children there were being evacuated, that particular headmaster took us for the price of one. My mother was now beginning to work as a dressmaker, because here they couldn't really stop her. To begin with, she had to be very careful, because she didn't want to upset the British. She'd been told she couldn't work. But clandestinely, she used to clean the floors of a public house. And my father would look after us. This was the time when, in order to be able to manage financially, even with the money we were being given by the charity, we lived in Eastbourne. When we went to Eastbourne, which was supposed to be cheaper than London, we thought, oh good, we'll be able to go and swim on the beach. But we were wrong, because all that there was on the beach was barbed wire. We were being invaded any day now, as we were told. And fortunately, that invasion didn't take place. Hitler already knew how many Jews there were in Germany, because when, in 1942, they decided on the final plan to eliminate all the Jews in the whole of Europe to begin with, and then presumably in the rest of the world, they already knew that at that time there were about 300,000 Jews here. They're less than that now, probably about 250,000 now. But Hitler already knew, he already had lists of those Jews of any prominence that he would send to concentration camp first. So weren't we lucky? Here we were. It might not have been very comfortable, but I still preferred sleeping in Tottegotte or at underground rather than in a concentration camp. And remember, because my brother and I are twins, we probably would have fallen into the hands of someone like Mengele, who in Auschwitz did these sadistic experiments on twins. He would have singled us out. So weren't we lucky? My brother and I worked hard. We both went to William Ellis Grammar School in Highgate. We got a good education there. We worked hard. We both won scholarships. Both of us won scholarships. I won a state scholarship to go to Pembroke College at Oxford to study law. My brother also got a major county scholarship to study law at Pembroke College at Oxford. We were still together. But before going there, it was only right, now that we'd taken British nationality, that we should do our national service. We were happy to do it. We were probably amongst the few people who actually wanted to go into the army. And we did. We were posted together One would have thought they would have posted us to Germany because we knew perfect German. But no, there were difficulties at that time in Egypt. Naguib was trying to get the British out of the Canal Zone. So they sent us to Egypt, where both my brother and I were on active service for the British Army, for which we both received the General Service Medal. After the army, we both went up to Oxford and got both the same degrees there. I went on and studied a further 3 years to qualify as a solicitor. And because I knew languages, because I also had knowledge of French and Spanish, I was immediately asked to do international work, which I then did. And it's rather interesting to know what sort of work I did at that stage. Because in the first place, the Austrians needed someone with knowledge of German, and the Austrians, who were in many ways almost more vicious against Jewish people than the Germans, they asked me to go over there together with some other German-speaking lawyers to go and see the Ministry of Justice, and I was selected to represent Austria. I was also at that time acting for Switzerland, so I was able to use my languages, which of course was very useful indeed. Even more interesting, though, is that it so happened that my firm that I was with in the city, they needed someone to do the work for the American government. And they thought that as I was doing international law, I would be the right person. So for 30 or 40 years, I did a great deal of work for the American government as well. Was called over to Washington on a number of occasions to advise the American government, not only on legal matters, but also on quasi-political matters, which I found very interesting. And the very first time that I ever went to Pennsylvania, to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it was on American government work, and not as a penniless refugee that I arrived there. So, you know, things in life can change, and they did for me. The best thing I ever did was to get married to Marianne, and we've now been married for 51 years. It's for both of us a second marriage, but isn't it wonderful that we were both free, ready for a second marriage at the same time. And here we are married for 51 years. And we now have between us, we've got 5 children and 12 grandchildren. I think I can show you just a little bit of that. That shows that we were destined to go to America, but never left. But of course, you can see there the date we left. This showed my brother and I in the first years here in England. We used to entertain. We loved singing and dancing. First we entertained refugees, and then later on we entertained the army. They gave us naval uniforms. And we used to sing, and that was great fun. The Americans were over here waiting to go into D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944. And they needed to be entertained. They didn't have television. So we helped to entertain them. Here there are photographs of us in the army. There are no photographs of us in Egypt because we were on active service there. But here we were on parade, and when the Queen came to the throne, she first went out to Australia, and on the way back from Australia, she went to Malta, where my brother and I were posted after Egypt. When the British left Egypt, we went to Malta, and there we were ready and being inspected before the Queen inspected us in Malta. Here's a photograph of my brother and I up at Oxford. This is my twin brother. He would look exactly like me, so you can imagine what he would have looked like. With his wife, Marion. And here's myself getting married to my wife called Marianne. Marianne. And that's it. So, in a way, we were very lucky to come here because we've always said how lucky that we had all the possibilities of doing reasonably well here. Yes, we worked hard, but if you work hard, at least in England, you get the opportunity. I know you don't have the state scholarships and other scholarships anymore. We know that. But there are ways in which you can make something of yourself. Now, when I come, one of the reasons which I want to support Sussex University is because I think university education is vital. Now, my wife and I thought, when we had more time, we should do something. We should perhaps talk about what happened to us. People should know. We should also fight racism and try and tell people that what is important is not what religion they are or what they look like, whether they're black or white or yellow. What is important is what sort of character they are, what character they've got. We thought we should do that. And that's why we volunteered. And for many years now, both my wife and I have gone round, not only in England, but also in Germany and to some extent in America, talking about what happened to us. Because we feel that we want to make a contribution. We know it's only a drop in the ocean, but every drop in the ocean is something. Even if there's only one person listening today, that will be worthwhile, coming all the way from London just to be able to speak to you, to say to you, what is important is to make something of your life, to try and be helpful and good. There's unfortunately an increasing amount even of anti-Semitism in this country now, or the anti-Muslim feeling. But you know, we're all the same flesh and blood. Yes, there are good Christians and bad Christians. There are good Jews, bad Jews. There are good Muslims and bad Jews. What is important is what a person is like, what sort of life they lead, what contribution they can make. And therefore, my plea is, make something of yourselves if you're at university at the moment. If you're not at university, pass on this message. Racism is something which cannot be tolerated. When you think about it, today is Jewish Memorial Day. We think of what happened in Auschwitz. We're always saying never again. It's very easy to say that. But you know, actions prove louder than words. When we say never again, let's mean it. Let each one of us take it to heart. Never again. Thank you for listening.